Real-world computer programming for kids of all ages, Step 43. Showing all the data, including images. Good whatever, everybody, morning, afternoon, or evening. Today we will create another app that will display not only the data we've already looked at in DBWB, data displayed as text only, but also the images that are stored in the States Tables Book Image Path column, and the Amazon pages that the data stored in the book URL column point to. To do so, follow these steps. 0. Open Visual Studio and start a new project, naming it States Data. 1. In the Properties pane, set the size .width of the form to 924 and its height to 760. From the toolbox, drag 2 panels onto the form from the Containers category, sizing them to take up most of the top half of the form, the first panel, and most of the bottom half of the form on the second panel. Your form should now look something like this, and it shows a screenshot of that. The top half of the form will contain a data grid view control, kind of like a spreadsheet. And the bottom half will contain controls that will display the contents of the current row, the one selected in the data grid view by the user. This will include the image, which, when clicked, will open the corresponding URL to the book's Amazon page. 3. From the Data category of the toolbox, drag a data grid view control onto the panel on the top half of the form. 4. Set the multi-select property of the data grid to false. This is to prevent more rows than one to be selected or highlighted at a time. 5. Set the selection mode property of the data grid to full row select, so that clicking within a row causes the entire row to be selected or highlighted, not just the clicked on cell within the row. 6. Double-click the form to open the code window inside the default event for the form, form1_load. 7. Add the following line of code within the form1_load event handler, and that sets the data source of the data grid view to the result of a method called GetStatesData. 8. Create the GetStatesData method as follows. And then it shows that code. Something new here is the try-catch block within a try-finally block. Instead of try-catch-finally, it's try-catch-finally. You can probably by now pretty much understand what the code is doing by reading it over. Note that the data grid view is populated with a load method. The now populated data table is then passed back to the caller, the form's load event handler, assigning it as the data source of the data grid view, thus populating the data grid view. Note: you will again need to right-click the MySQL command object and allow it to find and install the necessary NuGet MySQL package. This will also, as it did in a previous step, add the using clause, using mysql.data.mysql client. So doing this once in one project is not the end of it. You have to do it every time you use that object in a new project. You'll have to follow this step. I also had to add this code at the top of the form code file, form1.cs, and it shows the connection object being declared and the connection string. And then it shows it also in context, where it belongs in relation to other parts of the code. The form now looks like this at runtime, and there's a screenshot that shows that. Populating the bottom half of the form with the currently selected row. The next thing we will do is add controls to the bottom half of the form and populate them with the values from the currently selected row or record. This will prevent you from having to scroll the data grid to see all the columns. Plus, the data will be larger and thus easier to read. First, we need to drop several controls on the form. There are 7 values from each database row which can be displayed in text boxes. There is one date value, which will be displayed in a date time picker control, and one path to an image, which the image on its path we will display in an image control. Actually, a picture box is called a picture box control. Also, we will go ahead and add the controls that the user will later use to populate the have resided there, have visited, and notes fields or columns of the states table. So, drag and drop the following controls and components onto the panel at the bottom half of the form. 7 text box controls, 1 date time picker control, 1 picture box control, 1 rich text box control, 2 checkbox controls, 1 button, and 9 label components, 1 next to each control to describe each value being displayed, except for the picture, which should be obvious, and the checkbox controls, which have a built-in text property that you can use for them. Note: when you are adding a bunch of a certain type of control or component onto a form, you can drag and drop one, then copy it and paste it as many times as you need to. This will save you some of that tedious drag, drop, select the toolbox, drag, drop, select the toolbox, etc., ad infinitum, ad nauseum. You then just drag the clones of the first control you dragged and drop to where you want them to be on the form. Lay them out however you want to. I have arranged them like so, and the screenshot shows that. Now that you've got them arranged or laid out on the form, give the controls descriptive names. You don't need to name the label components, as you won't be referencing them in code. Change the text value of the labels, of course, but leave the name property, the default value, label 1, etc. However, you remember however, right? There is one exception to this. The label used above the notes, rich text box, should be named. A fitting name is LBL Notes. You will see why this exception is made soon. Name the text boxes using a consistent pattern, such as txtbx this and txtbx that, such as txtbx state name, txtbx square miles, etc. As there is only one date time picker and only one picture box, you can elect to change their default name or not. You doubtless noticed that some of the controls and components have a different appearance. This is to make them stand out as being the elements that the user can change. These are the 2 checkboxes and the notes, rich text box control. All of these controls and components are made invisible for now, as we won't get into that part of it until later. That being the case, here is the form, how the form looks at runtime at this time. And it shows a screenshot of that. Now for some code. We want all of the user modifiable controls to be invisible for now, but later we will make them visible. So I added this code to accomplish that. And it shows in the form load event a call to a method visibilize user controls, and it's passed an argument of false. And the comment says later we will change the argument to true. And then it shows the method itself. What it's doing is assigning to these controls and components visible property the argument that's passed in, which is either true or false. It starts off being false, so everything is assigned to false. Visible is false in all of them for right now. It's easier to do this in code than to tediously change all of the control's visible properties to false in the designer, and later back to true. This method, visibilize user controls, takes a bool argument, so is called either as visibilize user controls false or visibilize user controls true. When false is passed, it assigns that variable to each control named. Later, I will change the argument to true when we are ready to have the user update the database. This is the beauty of Boolean logic and using the bool data type. Rather than change a bunch of false assignments to true, we simply change the argument passed when calling the method from false to true. And the visibilize value, which is assigned to each control specified in the method, is assigned accordingly. The value of visibilize is changed based on the argument passed. So, just to be clear, as of now, the first line of the code in the method equates to set the visible property of the rich text box control to false. Later, after we change the value of the argument passed to the method, it will be the opposite. Set it to true. But as you can see, the controls are not displaying data from the database. The only control showing any value at all is the date time picker, which is showing us the current date at the time I wrote this. So now, let's try to get the controls to do that. showing data from the states table in the controls. To grab data from the data grid view's currently selected row and populate the controls with that data, follow these steps. 0. In the Form Designer, click the data grid view. 1. Double-click the data grid view. This will open the data grid view's cell content click event handler. And there's a screenshot of that. 3. Add the following code. And it shows the code for that event handler, which is pretty extensive. Now to dissect this code a bit section by section, and it shows the first part where constants are declared. Here we declare constants for the index of the columns. This way we can better understand which column we're working with rather than just using an integer value, which provides no real meaning by itself. You might wonder though, what about the state name column? Good question. The reason it's not here is because it is declared above, near the start of the form's code, shown here in context. And it shows code at the start of the form with that constant being declared. It is declared up there apart from its brethren because it is referenced in another method also. And remembering the dry principle, it is moved to the global area. You will see the other place it is referenced later. And then it shows two int values that are declared. The variables above are declared because they are needed in conjunction with the getCombinedRankValueRank method that is called from this event handler, which we will discuss in a little bit. And it shows quite a bit more code of the controls being assigned values from the grid. This is the meat of the code that populates the controls with data from the data grid view. Most of the controls grab their value from the current selected row. That's what e.rowIndex is. The E stands for event args, or arguments. When the data grid view is clicked, it knows which of its rows have been selected and exposes that data in e.rowIndex. As for the column, we just tell it which one we want to look at, such as state column, which is column 1. The second one from the left, as the first one is column 0. To get the combined rank value, we need to cast the returned value as an int. The data in any given cell can be any data type the database supports, so we must tell the compiler what data type it is, so it knows it's cool to assign that to the int variable combined rank value. Then the getCombinedRankValueRank method is called, passing that value. The reason for ranking the combined rank value is that the number itself doesn't tell us much. For example, Georgia has a combined rank value of 33, but what does that mean? Is it good? Missouri has a combined rank value of 60, but what does that mean? By ranking the combined rank number, which means little until it's compared with the other states' numbers, we see where they stand in relation to each other. For example, Georgia with 33 points is number 1. Missouri with 60 is number 12, etc. We will look at the SQL needed to calculate this ranking soon. Also, the code behind the getCombinedRankValueRank method. And when we're through with this app, all the code will be published for your viewing pleasure and usage. Next, we have the code to load the image into the picture box. To do this, we assign the value from the book image path column to the picture box's image location property. Note, to get the entire image to display within the confines we gave the picture box, set the picture box's size mode property to stretch image. Sometimes, in the interest of commenting your code, even things like the settings of properties, you might want to set these in code, such as in the form's load event or show event. But Visual Studio does show you which properties you changed from their default values in the Properties pane by bolding them. See, my habit of bolding things that are new are done by Visual Studio 2. The corresponding image, the book cover of the book dedicated to the currently selected state, thus displays, and it shows a screenshot of that. Finally, for this section of the code, there is the assignment to the current book URL variable. You may have noticed that it was assigned globally at the top of the form, too. This is because the value is assigned in one place and referenced in another place in the picture box's click event. We will examine that code later, actually in the next step. We will also then examine the code in the getCombinedRankValueRank method, as well as the code in the picture box's click event handler, which causes the URL for the book shown in the image to open in your browser. Until then.